Prosperous Empath, Kat here. It is a beautiful fall day here in New England. Fall is my favorite time of year. I feel like energetically, just the metaphor of the leaves following and Mother Earth preparing to cocoon and birth new beginnings. Like, it's just my favorite time of year. And today the sun is out, and after a week of rain, we're just enjoying like mid-70s days here. And I'm preparing for a weekend of all my favorite autumn things. So I hope you're enjoying fall wherever you find yourself and wherever you're tuning into today's episode from. Y'all are in for a treat with today's conversation. I'm sharing an interview with a coaching colleague talking about the other side of empathy, which is something that we've never really explored on the podcast before. And before we go there, I want to share and extend a special invitation to you. So we are reopening the doors to our Unbounded Mastermind later this fall. The doors are going to be open only briefly to join us in the beginning of November. I don't know about you, but I love starting transformational programs in fall, and particularly before December, because I find that it's like a beautiful off-ramp at the end of the year to then jumpstart into the new year with clarity and direction and focus, and already having a plan launched around what you're wanting to create in the new year. So Unbounded is one of my most favorite things I've created in my business, and we've been running it continuously since 2019. We have supported dozens of empathpreneurs in scaling their businesses to multiple six figures, to birthing books and new programs and new romances and new experiences of well-being and work-life balance, and learning how not to trade their time for money. And it is just such a transformational, deeply supportive, and generous community. So if you've been waiting for an invitation, if you've had your eye on our mastermind for a long time, consider maybe now's the time. You can find the link to connect with a member of my team in the show notes, or reach out with any questions. I also will have a couple of spots available at the end of October to connect with me personally if you're wanting to get on my calendar. So if now feels aligned for you, we would love to explore the possibility of welcoming you into our community. It is not for everyone, and we're super selective about who we allow to join us, because we want to ensure that you're set up to succeed. So let's explore that possibility together. And with that, let's jump into today's conversation. So today I have an esteemed coaching colleague of mine joining me on the show today. Adam Quiney is someone I know from my days back in accomplishment coaching, where Adam and I both trained as ontological coaches together. We were not in the same coach training program. We never worked with one another directly, but we always knew of one another. Adam was on the West Coast. I was always on the East Coast. But he is well known in the coaching community, and he's an executive leadership coach specializing in working with the smartest people in the room, which I love. I think that takes something to be able to claim for yourself. As a former software developer and attorney, Adam's learned the hard way about the costs that come from keeping your heart safe and chasing after external rewards to feel whole and complete. From love, Adam is connection, passion, presence, wit, and brilliance. And from fear, he's awkward, robotic, apathetic, irrelevant, and arrogant. He has learned to embrace all these parts of himself and works with others to do the same in their own life. So today on the show, we are going to be exploring the other side of empathy. Now, I'm really excited about this conversation because I chat with lots of folks who are well connected with their empathic natures, and they oftentimes become overrepresented in their lives, overly expressed in how they show up. And they show up as people pleasing and perfectionism and caretaking. And these are things we talk about on the podcast a lot. But what about the other side of empathy? What about those of us who learned that we needed to shut down our empathy in order to thrive? Now, this is something that we haven't really explored on the show before. So Adam left a successful career in law because he didn't want to have to shut his empathy down. And I think that that's really impactful because I do think that there are so many careers out there and leaders who feel like they cannot be attuned and connected with their empathic nature, and they can't leverage their empathic nature within their careers. So this conversation is really about Adam's journey in learning how he distanced himself from his own empathic nature and how he learned to reconnect with his own open-heartedness. We're going to jump into hearing about his career in law and how he transformed from a career in law to becoming an executive leadership coach. We explore this other side of empathy and really the liability of having a wide open heart. We jump into understanding some of these behavior patterns, how they show up, and how some of our own defense and survival mechanisms we develop in order to protect our own empathic natures and what we can do about them. It's a super insightful listen for any empath who wants to deepen their own understanding of their empathic tendencies and recognize some of those hidden behavior patterns. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Prosperous Empath Podcast, designed especially for empaths and highly sensitive entrepreneurs just like you who are committed to achieving holistic success. I'm your host, Catherine Wood, Master Certified Coach, author, mastermind leader, and founder of Unbounded Potential, a boutique coaching firm for empathic entrepreneurs. I'm on a mission to bring empathy back into the world of business. Each episode will focus on achieving more by doing less through leveraging empath-friendly leadership practices, boundaries, rituals, and systems, all the while continuing to care deeply about ourselves, others, and the world around us. If you are committed to joyful living and running a conscious business, but amassing wealth while doing so, proving that you can have both in a society that tells you you can't, then you are in the right place. Join me here each week to find out how. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review so you won't miss an episode. Plus, you'll find all the show notes and helpful resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Adam, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
I'm happy to have you here. You know, I was thinking about this conversation today, and I feel like I don't know you. Like I know of you, and I've known of you, and perhaps you of me for a really long time. But my only time meeting you in person, I was the MC at an event. So I was very much in like MC mode, trying to bring the heart and the like facilitation. And so I don't really feel like I've had an opportunity to get to know you. So I'm looking forward to having that by way of this conversation.
That's sweet. Did we meet in Victoria too? Did you come out this way?
I did. And you weren't there the year I went.
Oh, weird.
Or if you were, I probably was too scared to approach you.
That's like so funny. We can go into more of this in a sec, but like that's very much like a pattern or a theme in my life is people either too afraid to approach me or me too afraid to approach people. That checks out.
Amazing. Well, by way of getting us started, I'd love to invite you to share your pronouns and a little bit about your story, because I think we all learn through story.
Sure. So my pronouns are he, him. He, him. I think I just have two. And my story, the sort of salient high-level bits are my first career was project software. and then project management. And then I left that to pursue a career in law. I figured out pretty quick. I really liked studying law. It was like a super interesting subject to study. And then I figured pretty quickly that as a career, it was not going to be a good fit for me. And there was many warning signs. The biggest ones were probably that like every interview I did with a lawyer, none of them seemed very happy. And if I asked them like, do you love your job? They'd be like, well, here's the thing. I'd be like, that's okay. That's the answer in itself right there. But the other like big warning was I was at in a mediation because that was required in small claims court. You are sent to mediation first because they want to really have the clients work stuff out before they get lawyers involved, which is like the smartest thing in the entire known universe. Way to go, court system, for setting that up. But of course, we play the game. And so what happens is the lawyer just shows up to the mediation and then ruins it. And so my job was basically to be there to ruin the mediation. And by that, I mean, like, just say no to whatever was put on the table so that we could go to court and kind of push the envelope and extract value from the other side of the file, the person against my client. And I was in this mediation, and the wise mediators were having me sit quiet so that just the clients could talk to one another. And the people on the other side of the file were sharing like, we're not trying to do one over on you. We're not trying to screw you over. We just don't actually have any more money in our company. And we're trying to figure an equitable way to sort of like, meet our obligations and not go bankrupt, but also like, we just have to let some drivers go. And I was sitting there thinking like, boy, they're right. And they were saying like, we don't want to get lawyers involved because then they get paid all the value that's available to share with you is gone down the toilet to the lawyers. And I came back after this mediation and I talked to my principal, the person who was sort of like overseeing my work. And I said, what do I do? And he said to me, it's really good to be able to put yourself in the heart of the other side to understand what they're feeling. But ultimately you have to shut that down. You can't be empathizing with the other side because that's going to have you unable to fully vigorously defend the interests of your client. And so you have to shut that part of you off. And that was a real, maybe like a nail in the coffin for that career choice. I'd been, on some level, I knew I'd been doing this all my life. And I had about 6 months of coach training under my belt at this point, maybe a year and a half. I can't remember. And I could tell like, wow, I've been getting better and better and better in my life at shutting that part of me off. But I don't think that's what I want to make my life about going forward. And so that was sort of like the starting, maybe the inflection point for like the trajectory of my life really starting to shift.
I know you and I were talking about the book Give and Take before we shifted gears. And there's this example in the book about negotiation and how an empath approaches negotiations versus how a taker approaches negotiation. And he talks about this idea that when an empath or a giver approaches negotiation, they look for the win-win. And the taker looks for the win-lose. And I really kind of hear that in your speaking, like just this knowing that it occurs, like there was just this part of you that wasn't interested in foregoing some of the parts of you.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds very noble, down those lines. Like, yeah, there was a part of me that wanted to engage with the win-win on some level, and I want to just be like a yes to that. I kind of wonder. My belief is that over time, and when our fear is active, what happens is that we naturally move towards like a more win-lose, zero-sum game, kind of divide the pie up kind of state of mind. And I wonder if it was really that I was like, I felt like I wanted that win-win, or if there was just some part of me that had been turned online that felt like the sort of losing game down the other. I guess I'm hesitant to give myself all of the credit towards that. I'm kind of like, I wonder. You. Yeah, I wonder.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate that. Some noble pie. Well, I know we're chatting today about the other side of empathy, and I'm excited to dig into what you mean by that. And before we do, just to share a little bit of my own noble pie.
Yeah.
You know, when you reached out to me about coming on the show and you wanted to talk about this, I was like, I think I was a little protective. I was feeling a little protective of my audience and like, well, what's this message really about? Like, what's the empowering thread here? What is there for us to learn about the other side of empathy? And so I feel like I didn't really understand what you meant by it. So I'm excited to understand what you mean by it. And it sounds like it's been a part of your story and your journey.
Indeed. Yeah. Where shall we begin?
Yeah, let's start there. Like, I want to hear the journey.
Yeah. So I would say like, I'm a man with a very big heart, and by, like my natural state would be highly empathic, but, growing up, what that led to was an experience of like a lot of letdown, a lot of heartbreak, a lot of disappointment, a lot of like we could call it like the liability of having a big, wide open heart. And I would feel that like myself, but then I'd also feel it empathetically. Like if I felt it over there, or if someone else was upset or disappointed, or if like a friend called me up to play and I was already doing something, then I felt their disappointment and I would take that on and blah, 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 blah. And I remember like, did you by any chance ever see the movie Shirley Valentine?
No, never heard of it.
It's too bad. It's a really sweet, like kind of romantic comedy. It's old for me. I think it came out maybe in the 80s. It's about this woman who she's in a bad relationship and she and her husband were going to go away. They get into a fight and she goes to Greece by herself. And on this journey to Greece, she really like discovers herself. And that includes like meeting this swarthy Greek man who has a boat, and he like asks if she wants to go for dinner, and she's like, I'm not sure. And he's like, oh, it's okay. I think you are afraid I try to make fuck with you, but I not try to make fuck with you. Don't worry. And then eventually they make fuck with each other, and it sets her alight. And there's this scene sort of 2/3 of the way through where she's set to come back, and her husband's waiting at the airport with flowers, kind of like realizing like, boy, I've been taking her for granted. And she doesn't show up. And I was like, a kid of maybe 8 years old while my parents were watching this movie. And that scene destroyed me. I was just devastated, heartbroken. And we could I became Australian there. We could go down the path of like, well, he deserved it, or he had it coming. And what I think those sort of intellectual, like, well, it's on him, he caused his own heartbreak, is a way for us to protect ourselves a bit from the empathic response of the heartbreak we feel. Oh, it's okay that he feels the heartbreak, so I don't have to take that on board because it's justified. But never mind that. I felt this, and this was like a really common experience for me.
I noticed that. I'm curious to hear like a little bit more of the flavor of your heartbreak. I hear a lot of that for women. I don't typically hear it from the male story, like, and I share about this on the show a lot. Like, I came to coaching by way of relationship heartbreak, of exactly what you share. And for me, it always showed up through the lens of relationships, romantic specifically, just putting my heart on my sleeve, giving. And I'll just routinely not knowing who I was giving to or loving the wrong people, the wrong fits for me. Like, I wasn't necessarily self-regulated enough to know how to discern between who was for me versus who was not.
I think mine occurred maybe before I even got to the point of relationships. And I think a lot of my romantic relationships, at least. So I think a lot of the heartbreak I would feel would just be the devastation of feeling like I'd let my parents down, the devastation of feeling like I'd let my friends down, the devastation of feeling like I wasn't invited, or I wasn't wanted, or I was too much, or I was rejected, or like I was a disappointment to someone, or I'd left someone feeling disappointed. I'd have a friend, they would move away, and then I would be heartbroken and sobbing for days. And then I'm checking with myself to see how much of how much of the story to get into versus the distinguishing. So like if we were to carry the story forward, in 8th grade, which is sort of probably the height of the onset of puberty. And also here where I live, where all the schools, like you move from elementary school to junior high school. So you have all these schools feeding in. And we moved from where I lived and went to like a fairly rural school, like kind of farming community, to more of an inner city kind of school. And so I was new kid, didn't know anyone. There was like all of these kids coming together, the height of our hormones. And then on top of all that, I knew how to be around like the sort of the energy of the kids that I grew up with, but these were city kids and they had a different way of showing up. And what I was left with was like terror, completely unsure what to do, no idea how to like function in this world. And like just feeling, again, heartbroken, devastated, terrified. So I guess the through line through all of this is like a lot of emotions, a lot for me to be with in terms of my own emotional content and what I was feeling. So from there, I can talk about the strategy that started to come up. But if you want to hear more of the heartbreak, maybe you can cue me a little bit just so that I'm not stepping over anything.
No, I appreciate that. And I think that those are such beautiful examples of how we so often kind of find our sense of internal safety versus, or based on how we gauge other people's actions, intentions, energy, needs. Like it's kind of like, I think it's a way that we self-abandon.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. There's kind of two windows in which I hold what we would call empathy or being an empath. The first is that we have part of our essential nature is like something very heartfelt, something very connective. So like part of who I am as a man is connection. I love to connect with people, connect deeply with them. A lot of people have love as their essence. They're just a natural, like care about people, et cetera, et cetera. So we start with that like internal essential quality. And then the second part of this thing we call an empath is what I would assert is like a strategy. It's something we learn how to use the tool of how we are in the world in order to get a particular result. So, and I'd love to hear any challenges you have as I'm like laying this out, Catherine, just so we can kind of like pull it apart. Cool. So, if I'm faced with people that are unpredictable and I don't know how to deal with them, one of the things I'll learn to do is to like feel very deeply into their emotional center. How is this person showing up? And that way I can get out in front of what they're going to do. I can start to predict what's going to happen over there. This person is feeling agitated and angry. Okay, got it. I need to like make myself small. I need to maybe deflect the energy onto another kid. I need to, whatever it happens to be. So we learn this strategy to really feel out in front of ourselves, kind of like beyond the border of our own emotional state. We kind of lean forward and then we can start to feel that stuff. And then it allows us to stay safe. So I could talk about how I learned to do that briefly. Maybe I'll do that first and then we'll come back to this opposite side. What I learned to do was to be very afraid of bullies. And so I like felt a lot of their internal state so I could get out in front of it. And then in order to become more and more efficient of that, I kind of replicated that internal state. It's almost like I witnessed this model out there and then I brought it inside so I could like fully exist in it and understand like, okay, this is what's going on with the bully. This is their state. This is what I got to do to avoid it. Okay, now I can dodge them. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, I'm wondering if maybe you can give us an example. Were bullies a common part of your childhood?
Yeah, once we moved schools, there was a lot of like kids. I don't know if they were actually bullies, but I was terrified of them as though they were. Mm. And so I would watch what they would look for. I would study them effectively because if I felt them and understood them enough, then I could kind of like get out in front of it. I could preemptively avoid it. The irony is that by sitting in that energy enough, that's who I became. So inadvertently, I became a bully. Because the best way to sort of ensure you don't get attacked is to be the one on the attacking side, first and foremost. So that's a little bit like kind of how my empathy got twisted by my fear. It wasn't like I set out to do that, but I like started to feel out, to reach into things, started to feel that energy, started to become that energy. And then unknowingly to me, that's where I was left.
Mm.
That all
Oh
makes
man.
sense? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I just appreciate you sharing that because I mean, I'm connecting some dots over here. And
Mm,
so empathy is certainly part of my essential nature. And I totally didn't connect with it until, I don't know, maybe 6 years into this work. I always saw it as
mhm.
a weakness. And my strategy to protect it in childhood was to bring this certitude, this like level of righteousness. Like I was just always correct.
Mm-hmm.
Hard to argue or um, kind of get to me because I always brought this level of knowing and correctness. And um, one of my survival mechanism names is bra burning June Cleaver.
Mm-hmm.
um,
I
and
love it.
oh man, I loved her too.
That's
I
very
still love
descriptive.
her. But she really prevented relationship. And
Mm-hmm.
so I totally hear how that kind of like that righteousness distanced me from people, but also the thing I most wanted.
So there's a flip side, which is the other side that I wanted to speak to. This part might be, I'll caveat later. I'll say it first, then we'll see.
Okay.
So there was an impact I was living in, or like an experience I had that my empathic nature made very challenging to be with, which was like every time I wanted to do something, there was like this risk of heartbreak. There was this risk of disappointing people. And really, if we do anything of consequence, that's inevitable because not everyone's going to be happy about what we choose, even if what we're choosing is where we're going to have our birthday party. And so I was presented with a bit of a conundrum, not that I was conscious of, but the conundrum was kind of like, okay, you can do the stuff you want and the stuff you might feel called towards, but the consequence to that is you're going to feel heartbreak, you're going to feel let down, you're going to feel other people's emotions around it. Ugh. So what do I do? And the solution I can see now is that what I learned to do was to shut my heart down, to pull inwards. So if we think in the first case, what I'm doing is I'm leaning out beyond the edge, of my own subtle body and starting to feel other people. What I learned to do is to start to pull inwards, away even from my own emotional content. Mm-hmm. So what's happening is I have this strategy to avoid having to feel as much as I feel. Mm-hmm. Because I feel so deeply and I'm like, I don't know how to actually make anything happen in the world because it hurts when I do it. And so what do? I will retract. I will withdraw.
So I'd love to speak on that for a moment because we talk about that a lot on the podcast, like this idea that as empaths, we are deep feelers. And for many of us in childhood, it wasn't safe to feel our feelings because we were raised in these environments where our caretakers didn't know how to meet and hold our vast emotionality. And so they tried to fix it or make it better for us. But in doing so, it actually became unsafe to feel those feelings or to name those feelings. So we became more distanced from them and from feeling like it was okay to be sad or angry or devastated. So I really love you naming that because I think that is a really common experience across the board.
Totally. Yeah. And it can be our parents, our teachers, our guardians, and their response to it. Or it can be, there's a million ways that we learn like these feelings are too much or not good enough or not what's desired or there's so many different stories we created. But the impact ultimately is like, I can't do what I have to do if I also have to feel this. And so then we have like a couple stories, or a couple options. One is like, well, I'll feel this and I'll set aside what I have to do. I'll compromise. And then the game in life becomes sort of like, okay, I need to surround myself with just the right sort of people that don't trigger too much feeling. And then I can do what I have to do. The other game is sort of like, I got to do some stuff and it's really important and it matters no matter what. I have to set aside the feelings. So because we have these two things at odds with each other, if we set aside one of those two things. So that's what I learned to do. And maybe you can start to see the circle tying itself back to what that moment in law, sitting in that mediation is the Faustian bargain, if you like, was that I learned over time to like, okay, instead of feeling this feeling, intellect about it. Think about this feeling. Put it into your thought process. It's interesting. I'm sad. Well, what is sadness? Well, it's just a chemical, you can do this forever. And as I did that, what it meant was that I was able to do the thing and I didn't have to feel the feeling that came along for the ride. And so that's kind of like a bit of a rewarding thing. Like, yes, I did the thing. I've solved this impossible puzzle, reward loop, and then repeat. Mm-hmm. And so none of this, of course, is conscious, just become unconsciously better and better and better at playing that game until we get to the point when I start to look for a new career and law seems like a really good fit. I don't understand why. It just feels like it would be a really good fit. And it's sort of like, well, if I've been bouncing a ball off of my foot for the last 20 years of my life, just cause, then soccer is going to be a natural fit for me when I go looking for a sport to play. And this is sort of like akin to that. It was just a perfect fit for it. Make sense the way I'm laying that out?
Yeah. Beautiful.
So the thing I find so beautiful about this, and then we can kind of see where this leads us, is that my experience, not the reality, but my experience is often that people relate to themselves as like, I'm an empath and therefore I am different from this person over here that's unfeeling. And it creates an othering. You and I are different. I need to be distinct or special or separate, which of course is true. We're all unique in our own right. But what I find very beautiful about this way of looking at things is that actually we're two sides of the same coin. We're people that have huge capacity to feel. We just learned and were served by a different set of strategies in our life. On the one hand, sometimes what was really essential to get here was like we had to learn to feel into our alcoholic father. And so it was really important that we put our feelings over there outside of ourselves, feel into that person so that we can understand what's going on and then come back. For other people, we learned like our feelings and everything that we have the capacity to feel is too much. So we learn to retract. And actually, our strategies pull us out to these two extremes. But as we start to heal, we kind of come back to a center and start to realize like, oh, wow, we're actually the same kind of person, just appearing different on the surface, which I think is super cool.
I think it's, you said super cool. I think it's so beautiful, right? It's like this idea that as an empath, like when we've done our own work to become embodied, we can see past the shields or the wounds of other people to really feel into their hearts and their needs, like, for instance, like anger, for instance, I never used to be able to be with anger. Like I would just shrivel.
Yeah.
And I've done so much work that now, like when people are angry, like it doesn't stop me anymore. Like I can totally sense past their anger to the heartbreak or the sadness or the grief. And it's provided so much access to relationship, which I think we can get stopped by if we're not willing to really like look at the other side.
Yeah. Well, and did you learn to like, I have to imagine that your own relationship with your own anger really changed radically once you were starting to like see a little deeper and heal
so
and
refreshing.
do that work.
So refreshing to just be able to vent out what I'm pissed at in 30 seconds and then move on.
Yeah. One of the things I find striking is how, so this other side of the coin, I call an empath. Empathy, like empath. I feel all the stuff. Apathy, I'm an empath. I don't feel any of the stuff.
Is that a word? Is that a noun?
It is now. I mean, apathy is a word, right? Yeah. Apathetic, but I'm just calling it an empath because it kind of checks out.
Let's do it.
We coined it. One of the things I noticed in my work or have noticed is that empaths can often not feel what they're feeling because they're over there with the other people. And empaths cannot feel what they're feeling because they're up here in their head. And so they're two interesting strategies that can both allow us to kind of stay out of the heaviness maybe, or the danger, or whatever we want to call it, of our own emotional state. And each side of that coin, either way, we have people that feel big things. We feel in a big way, and that can be a lot to be with internally. It's a lot to metabolize and to hold that in our nervous system.
So I actually would love to, I'm just mindful of the time, and I want to hear how this story unfolds, because I think for those of us who have these gifts, right? These like intellectual gifts, right? You self-identify as like the smartest guy in the room. So that it can be hard to give that up, right? It can be risky to give that up, to forego the strategies and reconnect with the heart center, the integrated, the embodied center. So can we segue there?
Yeah. Do you have a question to start, like to open that up?
Well, maybe like, what did it take to give up your strategies?
It's really interesting because what has us change is like a genuine desire for something beyond where we are, like something that's not currently available with everything that we currently do and be in life, or to feel the kind of bankruptcy of all of our strategies.
Totally.
So either, things kind of suck, or they don't suck, but they're just like, it's not what I want. Or I really see something that I want to get over there. The trouble is that if we're apathetic, we don't really feel either of that stuff. It just exists intellectually. And so like, it was really tough for me to like feel anything that made it worth trying to do stuff different. Like it's almost a perfect strategy, because the more apathetic we become, the less reason there is to change, and the less reason there is to change, the less we will change, and the less we'll change, the safer we'll stay. Life stays familiar and easy. So for me, a lot of it was like the things that allowed some shift, and then I can talk about the process of shifting, but it was kind of like having people that were really, really skilled and talented. You and I have the same pedigree of training, and like people with a lot of experience and that had gone through this themselves, that were able to like really sit with me and watch me try to intellect my way out of things and keep pointing to that as a starting point. And then every time I do that, be like, how is this leaving you feeling? And for the longest time, how it would leave me feeling was just kind of frustrated and annoyed at them. Mm-hmm. And through their support, I started to see that was the ever-present experience of my life, is that I'd created all these strategies to avoid being disappointed or heartbroken or let down. But my experience of life was one of continual low-grade heartbreak, frustration, disappointment, letdown, and like along for the ride kind of resentment. I was resentful that people didn't show up more powerfully, or that life didn't look better or more different. And so it took a long while to like walk that path. And I think probably the only thing that really allowed me to start to get underneath that was that I was in a year-long committed program. If this was sort of like, let's work with a coach, for a while and we'll see how it goes, I probably would have worked with them for 3 months and then been like, yeah, it's been great, but I think I've got everything I need. And then I would have moved on. And I never would have gotten underneath this to like really at the like, wow, life is like a 7.5 or maybe a 7.25 across the board. It's fine. It's good. It looks nice. And some part of me just could not care whatsoever about it.
Man, I appreciate your version of the story, because it sounds like you broke it up in your first year of your transformational journey.
Started.
I don't think mine happened until maybe like my fourth. And it wasn't because of coaching. I think it was because of real life. I think I just realized in my romantic relationship that I was no longer committed to being right and righteous. Because while it felt great, you said the feedback loop, while it felt great in the moment, it left me feeling disconnected and alone.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, the way my life looked was like, I was good at parties. I could talk to everyone and I was glib and charming. It was always super lonely. Never alone, always lonely. I had many acquaintances, not very many, if any, like deep friendships. Great, like always dated people that I liked and loved a great deal, no intimacy. So there are these like dichotomies that I had to sort of like, I was very good at, it's sort of like that lawyer. I'd be like, do you love your job? And they go, well, here's the thing. You'd be like, is your life really amazing, Adam? And I'd be like, well, here's the thing. Well, what about like friendships? Well, here's the thing. I have lots and lots of people. And then there'd always be a cherry sort of on the top, which would be like, and I'm okay with that. Yeah, I have a lot of acquaintances, not too many deep friends, but I'm okay with that because then I can stay at home and work on my own stuff. So there was like this sort of closing of the circuits that I could never see beyond it. And when I started to look beyond it, or be stood for to look beyond it, I'd start to be like, but I'd actually kind of like more friends. I actually kind of like more intimacy in my relationship. I actually kind of like to go to a party and like feel connected and like I'm meeting people, all of those sort of things. That's an ongoing journey. That's been 15 years and it's still going.
I love that. Just like that theme of being willing to put down the qualifiers. Just say what there is for you to say and put down the qualifiers, justifying for the status quo.
Totally. Yeah. Stop making it okay. Let it be as it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love that. Right. It's like, I think that's really kind of the first step to shifting is acceptance, right? Accepting what is.
Yeah. Turning off our emotional center is like an incredible way to adapt. That's very adaptive because then we stop caring. And if we stop caring, well, there's no need to change. But the trouble is you don't stop feeling. You just diminish your capacity to feel what you're feeling. So the feelings are still there, churning around. And so it's sort of like a TV that's just constantly playing, like the volume's still there. It's still showing up in our life. And so when we start to stop telling ourselves it's okay or qualifying or whatever, and just listen to the signal and hear what's coming through, magic starts to happen. But it takes a while because at first things start to feel crappy. Mm-hmm. Or they feel whatever we don't want to feel usually.
Mm-hmm. I was listening to this podcast on the wheel of emotion. And they were talking about how, many people are confronted by people's anger or sadness, but at least when they're angry and sad, they're still in the ring with you. They're still fighting for something. And it's really like that experience of resignation that we should be a lot more worried about.
Yeah. And resignation doesn't, I find our collective belief about resignation is it's like a big sigh. But it tends often to be, especially for people that skew the way I do, our resignation tends to sound very empowered. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have that many people that I do that much stuff with, but like I'm actually okay with that because it means that I can come home and work on my hobbies, and I love my hobbies. Like we find a way to be okay with the thing, even though we're resigned that it couldn't be any different. And that also is very hard to get underneath because we have to be willing to, again, right? We have to be willing to stop letting it be okay. Feel what's actually there.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. There's something I'd love to share, in this distinction of apath versus empath that I find, which is apaths, because they draw inwards, they don't feel as much as a strategy. And so what happens is they end up with a lot of false negatives. Someone will be like upset and they're like, oh, it's fine. There's nothing here that we need to work with. They diminish it internally. And so consequently, they're also diminishing it externally. So there's this state of false negatives. That person was really upset when you did that. No, they weren't upset. Or, whatever. Oh, there's some emotional content that needs to be addressed. It's fine. Step over it. When people's strategy is to lean out over the edge past their own emotional center, they can lose sight of what they're feeling. And consequently, they can project outwards and end up with false positives. And false positive, it's not to say that sometimes empaths are really like, I am really feeling sadness for this person. This person's sad and they're not aware of it. There's also times when the empath is actually feeling their own sadness and they're unaware of it. And so it's interesting because I think there's a belief like one is better than the other. They're just two different adaptive strategies. And the more we can start to see things through that light, the less othering happens. And then the more we can start to heal with each other. Instead of like, I'm over here doing my work, but you need to do your work. We can start to see like, oh, wow, this person is doing the other version of what I've learned to do. Okay, got it. There's something like, maybe I can see something for myself. Like maybe I'm unwilling to show up the way that they are willing to show up, vice versa, et cetera, et cetera.
I really appreciate that distinction. And I almost hear that there's a little bit of a nuanced one. And I'm sure there's nuanced for both.
Love nuance.
But with the empath, like I actually have it that there's a distinction between being a wounded or unregulated versus being embodied, or to be a prosperous one, right? Like that ability to both hold your own emotion while being able to sense other people's, and discern the difference between the two. And actually, I'd love to share this with you because on my MCC journey, we're both master certified coaches, right? So, the thing I loved about becoming an MCC was like, what was the breakthrough that was in my way? And for me, it's this very conversation. It's this idea that I could bring those parts of me that was sensing other people's emotions into the coaching conversation in a way that I never thought I was allowed to.
Yes.
And being able to name it, like, hey, like I'm sensing some grief in the space. Like, is that mine or yours? Is there something there for you? And not being attached and not being like unregulated by it. It's not like I was taken out by the grief. I was just present to it and could speak it.
And that question, or maybe it's a qualifier that you put in, is like the crux of it, where you were like, is that mine or yours? Like, I'm not attached to it. And like just the generosity of that. And I remember like part of my journey, I think this happened prior to my MCC work, but like was sort of at first people like, well, what do you feel? And I was like, nothing. I don't feel anything. Haven't you been listening for the last 5 years? But I'd have to start to like feel, and frankly, I would feel like making stuff up at first, because, when you're learning to taste wine on your palate, as an example, you're like, I don't know, I taste tobacco. And then you're learning through that process, like to discern the different flavors that are there. And this is the same way I feel like the journey has been for me, to like feel what's in that space. And it can become very playful. Like we can be like, hey, someone will say something like, oh, I don't have any fear, I'm never afraid. And be like, okay, that's really interesting, because I notice I don't believe you. And what do you make of that? And the nuance there is like, what do you make of the fact that you're wrong because I don't believe you? But what do you make of the fact that you're saying one thing, and over here what's happening is that I have a sense of not believing you? Is that because I'm crazy? Is there something in space? Like, what do you think about that? And it allows us to like you said, like to be really regulated and whole and complete in our capacity to be really feeling people, and then just offer it up like a gift and then release it. If they're like, nah, I think it's totally yours. We're like, all right, cool. I'll take that on. It might very well be.
This is fun. I feel like we're getting into some coaching Yoda work here.
Yes, indeed.
Right? It's like the tools we have as coaches to access different parts of our clients and ourselves.
Yeah. And the trust. Because I would imagine for me as an empath, as someone who veered that way, it was very important that I not feel stuff, right? That was a survival strategy. For other people who veered towards whatever we want to call the strategy of over empathizing, we'll call it, so that it's clear it's sort of like a bit unregulated. It's very important that that they're right about what they're feeling. So on both sides of the fence, we can get when we're unregulated, attached to like what we are feeling or what we're not feeling. And when we become clean, we can kind of like just take a swing, just offer it up like a gift and then like release it. And that allows a lot more playfulness, starts to become much more improvisational.
So let's talk about this. And I'm wanting to just get this in because it just feels important. So this idea of being an empath and tending that way, like how do you check that part of you? Like, what are the signs that you're veering towards empath, and how do you repivot, or what? Yeah, like, because I'm just imagining so many of our listeners are really gonna resonate with this and want to know what to do with it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if they're constantly in their heads or scared of their emotions and have this tendency that you do, how can they interrupt it or course correct?
Yeah. Usually the thing that's the lower the volume of the feeling, the better. Meaning like if you're filled with rage, that's a lot to feel, but a small amount of frustration is easier to feel. So it's sort of like our strategies end up becoming like a management of our bandwidth or our pipeline. We throttle our emotional content. So rather than feel a lot of rage or a lot of anger or a lot of grief all at once, my strategy unconsciously ends up leading to me feeling a little bit of something forever all the time. So I find people that have like that veer this direction, one of our access points can be sort of like low grade frustration or like tolerance or like disappointment. Those can start to give us ways in. And so when I start to get present to like my frustration, my impatience, my like that feeling, that's usually a good point where it's sort of like really valuable for me to slow down and be like, what if like I need to actually tend to some feelings? I need to slow down. Like, what am I actually feeling? And I do this knowing that the immediate first response is going to be something like, I don't have time, or what a waste of time, or that's not going to achieve anything. And then the immediate second response is sort of like, fine, I'll take care of this anyhow. And then an attempt to check the box off, which is sort of like going back to the head, get stuff done. And so those are my like diagnostic tools. You know, they're like, hey, it's real right now. It's here. And then the hard part of the work is like being willing to actually like create the time and do this in the face of that resistance. Because our resistance is very, very clever and it's very well reasoned and it's always justified in the moment. I really don't have time to feel sad right now. Yeah, but I'm not going to be able to like write a very effective email and put out 3 podcast episodes if what's really here for me is a bunch of grief. Like I got to get at that first. So that's, I find like a really great way is like look for the low grade frustration, disappointment, you know, whatever that experience is for you, start to get better and better at checking in with that. And then make the time to really sit down, breathe, and ask yourself what you're feeling and be with it. And that starts to set us free.
I have a client who she'll oftentimes on calls bust out her emotions wheel.
Uh-huh.
And hearing you made me think of that. And I really appreciate that reminder, right? Like looking for the low grade emotions or the low grade cues that we're feeling something a little off kilter or outside of the realm of normal.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like that metaphor of the sommelier drinking wine, because no one comes onto this planet and is like, this tastes like tobacco and strawberry. And so most of us who have learned as a strategy to tamp our emotions and withdraw from them, we just don't have a developed palate. And so starting to learn to distinguish, to discern what we're feeling in the moment is highly valuable. It trains our ability to like just know ourselves better, to be more in tune with ourselves. And I actually have a super easy resource that people can get, if I can share that.
Please.
Yeah, it's called a Grok deck, Grok. One of my teachers suggested it to me. And it's 2 decks. You can buy them on Amazon. It's very, very simple. One deck is a deck of something like 60 cards, and it's just a bunch of needs. I need space. I need consideration. I need acknowledgement. And the other deck is just a bunch of feelings. I feel sad. I feel emotional. I feel whatever. And that sounds so simple as to be stupid, but it's so valuable because we can sit down and just look through this deck and start to be like, which of these am I feeling in this moment? And what that does is it builds up our emotional vocabulary. We start to develop a deeper sense of ourselves and our ability to discern that. So valuable, so incredibly valuable.
I love that. I mean, and I love the simplicity of it because it really is simple, you know, like every time I can just say, I'm so pissed and allow myself to feel it, like oftentimes that's all it takes to move through it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the hardest part because as soon as we name something, we're touching it a little bit closer. And the way all of this stuff stays rooted is that our strategy is designed to avoid having to touch it. So anytime we're like, oh, there it is. Yeah, I'm freaking angry right now. And then it doesn't necessarily solve everything, but it does a great deal. It creates some space and like, no wonder. All right, things are making more sense. Okay, maybe my next action is a little different now.
Totally. This has been lovely. It's been really connecting, talking to you. And I really do feel like I got to know you by way of this conversation. Hopefully it was mutual.
Over here, I'm super stoked your podcast exists, Kat. Like, it's hard. It's hard for people to feel. And I'll just share very quickly, like, I was down in Ohio doing a bunch of work with like real men. I'm saying that playfully, but like construction workers and like guys that can do stuff with their hands that I cannot. And our work tended into emotions, not because we sought to go there, but because as we started to look at like, what's the breakdown on the team, what has to be addressed, that's what was there. Was like men that cared a great deal about the work that they were doing and were finding themselves stymied. And then we're left in this experience like, I'm really angry that we can't do what we're trying to do, but I don't have any place for that anger to go. And then sitting in resignation. And so like, I'm super stoked that you're in these conversations because it's so valuable and it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's not relegated to like any subset of our population. Everyone benefits from this kind of work.
Thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as we wrap today, I love to ask this of all my guests, and I always get unique answers. What's made the difference for you in becoming a prosperous empath?
Well, having a coach for sure. Like, I don't know how. I'm plenty smart, but none of this work is really through the intellect. And, I'm going through a process right now with my coach where I was like, but does this even make a difference? And she's like, my experience is this makes the most difference. And just lovingly inviting me further into the same process we're describing right now. So that's made a huge difference. The second thing has been releasing my attachment to results and trusting that I'm reliable to create them, which I super am. Very reliable to create results. I'm not so reliable to like feel my emotions. And I think those are like the two biggest things. And I will put a button on this one and say one third thing is like commitment to continuing the journey. So not doing it like for 6 months, I'm going to really work on emotions, then I'll be finished, but rather just like relating to it as a mountain with no top. I'm just going to climb it.
Thanks for pitching me coming on the show. This is such a delight.
It's really good to spend time together.
Thank you so much for listening today to this episode of the Prosperous Empath Podcast with me, Catherine Wood. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review so you don't miss an episode and so more empaths just like you and me can find the show. As a thank you, each month, one lucky reviewer will receive a 60-minute coaching session with a member of our Unbounded Potential team. You can find all the show notes and bonus resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Thank you so much for listening and locking arms with me to bring empathy and prosperity back into the world of business.